All right, we're live, so I apologize for the delay. Welcome to this afternoon's discussion on Snow White and Rosebud. So, thoughts? Where would you like to start?
Can we just compare the two for a second? Just recognizing how different they could be in terms of, I know it's a formulation for the fairy tale, but quiet, shy one versus outdoorsy, lively.
They're not twins though, right?
I don't think so.
Just two little.
I think it's going to be like a researcher, right? I mean,
Yeah, for the...
So, any thoughts? And again, just to make sure that we're not misinterpreted as pathologizing what might be normal behavior. Let's say that this came to, it's of clinical interest, right? That we identified clinical significance here. So we're going to start to formulate what might be going on. So from that perspective, behaviorally, what are some thoughts?
I think if we could get so much so they rely on one another and one becomes more of a dominant personality compared to the other, there could be signs of what dependence. If you have someone who's a little bit more passive but really relying on the stronger personality, you could have a strong personality domineering over the other one.
Interesting, because we've seen some real-life cases of this, not necessarily with sisters, as depicted in this particular Disney story, or no, sorry, precursor to Disney, really. But among friends, and having peer pressure result in pretty significant behavior, because it does deal with real people, and because there was some unfortunate and untoward outcomes. We'll hold that conversation off camera with regard to what we know about the story of Slenderman. But it also took place in the woods. It's just a bit of a link, loose association between this story and that event. What else with regard to what we've observed here between these two sisters? And it might come up in some way on your shelf exam, on your exam as well.
I thought it was a little unusual that they were so quick to let the bear in. They don't know the bear, they haven't spoken with the bear, and just because the bear said, "I'm cold, please let me in," they said, "Sure." And it turned out the bear was okay. But I just thought it was a little precocious for them to let the bear in so quickly.
Yeah, what about that? Anything from you Disney fans or you folklorists about this? Have you ever heard a story before where somebody actually let somebody in their home and it turns out to be not so good? Right? Yeah. The wolf is very metaphorical in anthropology about what it represents. And what it represents is not good. Right? So I'm not going to really dive deep into that other than saying that the wolf is very symbolic. The bear is not. Remember, and I'm sure we could come up with some stories in which letting a bear in does turn out to be not such a good thing. But in the story of the three bears, it's Goldilocks that actually breaks into their house. So we see this symbolism repeated here, that even though I think many of us may have begun to read this and realize, wait a minute, I want to do the same thing. On the other hand, from a folklore perspective, the symbol of the bear is consistent here, as the symbolism is reliable here.
I feel like kids also can be kind of trusting, more so than an adult would be. I don't know, also, I mean, it's a talking bear. A kid would be fascinated by that.
Point well taken. Yep, point well taken. The other thing I want to make sure we bring up here, I think it was so obvious that nobody here mentioned it. I did kind of hint at it just a little bit with regard to a research perspective. When you have two people that are so close in age that turn out to be such quote-unquote different people, we can't dismiss the psychosocial elements or factors that influence human behavior. All right, this is real interesting here because what we usually see with regard to psychosocial factors is the reverse, right? This is where the discussion comes up, nature versus nurture, in that we usually think of this as monozygotic twins being separated at birth and then we follow them. Here, what we see is that These two sisters are actually reared together in the same house, but turn out to be such different people. So this is a little bit of a twist where we could look at what biological factors are in play with regard to governing and guiding their behavior. One becomes an extrovert and an outdoorsy type, and the other one is more introvert, prefers to stay inside. So here we get into the discussion of the biological determinants if their psychosocial factors were held consistent. Right? So that's something to consider here.
Would that not be common sometimes for siblings though, who are like trying to find their own like niche in a family dynamic and then want to sort of like carve out their own area, so they do something very different from their sibling?
Completely normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, and that's why my disclaimer that we're not trying to pathologize, we're trying to teach. Right? How many, I mean, you guys are a little young yet, but you'll get there. Parents talking about, wow, I mean, how different these kids are, right? I never saw my kid, 3 kids, so different in the way they, and again, they're all brought up the same, plus or minus. We know that different first versus second versus third child, et cetera, are treated differently, parented differently. But here we see it again, right? Here we see it again. Any detail provided in this story with regard to who's the younger sib? So consistent with what we know in the literature with regard to parenting, who would you guess to be the younger sib?
Snow White.
Snow White, why?
Because she's portrayed as the shyer, the quieter one,
Yeah?
and Rose Red Rose.
Uh-huh.
She's portrayed as the more outgoing, adventurous one.
And you
I
think
feel
that's,
like it'd be opposite.
it's the opposite, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the second child usually has all the mistakes made for the first child. And here, this is non-scientific, at least in the way I'm interpreting it, right? But the second child would be more outgoing, more outdoorsy. It's the first child, because of there having been the single child that is usually more introverted.
Oh, absorbs more of the parents' anxieties.
Yeah, parents are more protective of the first.
Yeah, yeah. If not overprotective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, we see that come from the literature in different ways. There's no doubt about that. So, and that's speculation with regard to, in this story, who might be the older and who might be the younger.
Well, I would also say that one maybe hint towards that is that Snow White is the one who ends up marrying the prince, and then like that, you know, old-fashioned timing, the oldest daughter would be the one who would marry the best and like most prestigious, and then Red Rose marries the younger, like the brother, not the actual prince.
I would love to see the sequel to that. I would love to see the sequel to this. Any other thoughts about this story? What else?
I thought also the dichotomy between the bear, who was initially somebody that I think made most of us nervous, that we would not have encouraged children to let into the home, versus the dwarf, and specifically, so it's like kind of good, bad, and animal, human, and they're kind of switched unexpectedly, which I guess we then learned was a curse all along. That there are those interesting dichotomies kind of within the sister and then within the non-sister people.
Yeah, it's interesting because usually folklorist morals would be, or you would expect them to include the pro-social warning to not let unfamiliar people / animals into your house. So we're all braced for something very bad to happen. And what they do discover is that the negative element here is that we have the dwarf discovered on the outside, right? Away from the house, where you'd think, in a way, it would be safer to interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
Yeah, it seemed like it was more.
we lost that connection.
Yeah, it seemed like it was like less of a tale like Red Riding Hood and the wolf of like, oh, don't, you know, associate with outsiders, and more of a tale of like how to distinguish who of outsiders would be good or bad to interact with. And it seemed like the moral would be like, if they demonstrate gratitude, then they are like safe and good to interact with, and if they're not like grateful, if they're not polite, then those are gonna be the ones to be like steering clear of.
Yeah, yep. That's good. All right, so we're gonna get the thoughts here. The one leap I wanted to make here is the amalgam of the two characters that these sisters actually meet, right? The bear followed by the dwarf. You know, it just got me to think if there was any way we could come up with a drug to talk about today. And when I put these two characters together, I thought about the dwarf bear, which is a nickname for a particular species of bear, which of course is the smallest bear known. Anybody have a guess? Anybody have a background in?
Black bear.
No brown.
Sorry, brown, no?
Black, I think is the
Black, no?
smallest.
Sun bear. I looked it up. I didn't know that. I'm not trying to come off as an anthropologist or a zoologist, far from it. I actually looked that up, sun bear. And I just thought that we may have a little bit of a loophole here because sun, sunny, and sunshine are all street names, street slang, for mephedrone, which is better known or more commonly known as bath salts. Right now, I don't see any way these two sisters or anyone can actually be construed as being under the influence of a synthetic stimulant, right? But I thought it was interesting because obviously the name carries over to the story of Snow White, and I think the low-hanging fruit is that Snow White happens to be about cocaine use disorder, right? In as much as her name, Snow White itself, is street slang for coke. So, well, let me start off with Snow White, or snow, both, cocaine, and then Snow White and Rose Red, combination, sun, sunny, sunshine, street slang itself, street slang itself, say that quickly, for mephedrone, which is a synthetic form of stimulant. So this takes us to the synthetics, and certainly for stimulants, I want to make sure we have this down comfortably. Individuals who present on bath salts, on stimulants, mephedrone, sun, are likely to demonstrate acute intoxication effects consistent with the stimulant, which is pretty obvious, which is simply increased sympathetic tone. We discussed this morning. Increased sympathetic tone will be clinically indistinguishable from a heart attack and or a panic attack. The only thing really differentiating those two are evidence of acute myocardial ischemia. Right, so there's your increased sympathetic tone. But the synthetic nature of this will add another attribute to the equation. And which attribute is that? How do you distinguish synthetic stimulant from a non-synthetic or natural stimulant?
Like a UDS wouldn't show the synthetic, right?
That's true, right? So you're not going to catch it, or you're less likely to catch it unless you have a high clinical index of suspicion. And what should that clinical index include? What would you be looking for in addition to the increased sympathetic tone, the adrenergic drive?
Isn't there like some hallucinogenic properties to bath salts?
Yeah, right? Significant aggression and agitation. Individuals who present will often look very similar, like they're high on PCP, right? So that combination, in terms of presenting signs, would be consistent with the synthetic stimulant.
Are there any of the ocular signs like redness or like PCP or?
That I have to look up, to be honest with you. Not to my knowledge, but I don't want to say no. I'll have to look that up. I'll tweet the answer later. For those who I may not touch base with this afternoon. Yep. All right, so I just want to make sure we got, and that, again, that's the synthetic nature with which mephedrone or sun is synthesized. Yeah.
There is nystagmus.
So it's got more than one PCP quality then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only does it have the behavioral characteristics of PCP intoxication, which is that aggression and assaultive type of behavior, but maybe physiologic as well, including nystagmus.
So other than a drug screen, like how would you differentiate between PCP and bath salts?
Between PCP, whether or not there are additional signs of PCP,
Okay.
right? And I'm assuming that your patient's self-report is going to be quote-unquote unreliable, which I think is safe to assume. And let's say for purposes of the shelf or an exam, that there are no collateral informants. There's no family, friends, social support that's going to tip you off about what just happened, right? In the absence of information. Yeah, we're thinking PCP, we're thinking additional signs, physiologic especially, beyond motivating factors.
But from a management perspective, it's probably not that important to distinguish.
Exactly right, right? Supportive, quiet room. For the depression/agitation, benzodiazepines, and for severe agitation, probably haloperidol, right? Probably an antipsychotic, especially one that's available through the IV route.
Is there different lengths of time that you would expect for those symptoms to last?
For methadone, they're relatively short-lived. I have to look up, though, how that compares to PCP. So you're asking about the duration differential?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I have to look that up.
So for methadone, the expected duration is between 1 and 2 hours.
And that's consistent with cocaine in the system as well. It's very quick. A negative tox screen for cocaine and stimulants, called cocaine, should not dissuade you from cocaine being the cause of the patient's presenting signs, aka a panic attack.
I have a question about cocaine. I just remember reading that cocaine used for medical purposes is dyed blue, but I've forgotten the rationale for that. Do you? Oh, maybe it's so that. No, I've forgotten. I was wondering if you know.
Oh, I have no idea. I didn't even know there was any medical indication that it was Schedule 1.
It's a Schedule 2.
Schedule 2 now?
Serious nosebleeds and nasal spray.
Oh, okay, yes, yeah, all right, yeah. Okay. Dyed blue?
I'm gonna look into it. I'll let everyone know what I come up with.
Yeah.
She asked me yesterday, I said it's like the same reason they dye money blue out of banks. Just to see who's using it.
Yeah.
Or who's stealing it.
Interesting. All right, any other thoughts about?
I had a thought. So I guess it's like interesting in terms of like Grimm Brothers and German fairy tales. Like in high school I took German and we had like a little section about German fairy tales, and like a common theme in them is like they seem like they try to disproportionately like scare children as compared to like maybe other cultural fairy tales. So I thought it was interesting in this fairy tale. It doesn't seem like it's as like scary as other ones. And I was like quickly eyeballing the German versus the English, because I noticed a lot of times in the English translation, they tend to like make it less severe as compared to the German one. But this one seems like pretty accurate, so I thought that was just kind of interesting.
Even the original?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm assuming that you're okay with coming across an evil dwarf.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe people in this room may not be frightened by that, but I wouldn't tell that to your niece or nephew. Hold off on that. The name Rose Red is something I want to just focus on a little bit here. I think, you know, in looking at her sister, Snow White, and we will discuss this more in detail in about a week or so when we discuss the actual film Snow White, looking at other drugs of abuse. But Rose Red's name does not necessarily or as easily translate to a drug. Right? Anybody here, with regard to the name Rose Red, have it ring a bell? Somebody thought to Google it.
I only thought of like rosé.
Rose Red and wine, right? What do you got when you Google Rose Red?
Some movie?
Movies. Any series? Who wrote it?
Stephen King.
Yeah. So this really gets into a discussion about how Disney links to Stephen King, just way too often to be a coincidence.